that helps. So each person is going to be talking a little bit about the construction work or the monitoring that goes into trying to scientifically project and predict what's going to be happening in the future and how best we can plan for it. So without further ado, Brenda told me if I read a long bio, she would maybe walk out of me. So let's see what I wrote. I don't know this. Brenna's amazing. I think everybody knows that. She told me to keep it short, but Brenna is the Assistant Director of Duxbury Beach Reservation. My partner in crime. We try to take all our projects and divide them in half. Brenna is responsible not only for overseeing the marketing and coastal ecology program, every project Brenna's been involved in for the coastal resiliency, whether it was a great idea, a permit that was submitted, negotiating for product or reviewing on-site work, right down to the 3 years of monitoring that we do after every project. So Brenna is going to be speaking tonight. I'm just going to hand the microwave over to you.
Hi, my name is Britta Blackray. Thank you all for joining us here tonight. We're really excited to share more about the projects going on at Duxbury Beach, whether that be DBR projects or various partners. So I'm going to hopefully fairly quickly give an overview of our coastal resilience program, why it's important, what our goals are, and kind of what it looks like today and moving into the future. So a quick introduction to Duxbury Beach Reservation. Sorry if this is a repeat for folks. We are a nonprofit organization that owns and maintains 4.5 miles of Duxbury Beach. So that's spanning from the south end of the Duxbury seawall down to the north end of the Gurnett revetment. It includes, Duxbury Beach Park with Blakeman's Restaurant, as well as the town east parking lots and OSV Beach. So DBR is made up of a board of directors, a group of dedicated trustees, as well as full-time, part-time, and seasonal staff who run kind of the day-to-day of DBR's programs. Our mission is to protect and preserve Duxbury Beach as a naturally functioning barrier beach. So one that helps protect the coastline from storm impacts, provides habitat for wildlife, and is a place that South Shore visitors and others can come and enjoy. So meeting that mission isn't always easy, as I'm sure many of you know, living on the coast. It takes a lot of active management, maintenance, large-scale restoration, and more to keep Duxbury Beach here and accessible to folks. So tonight we're going to focus on the preserve piece of our mission, which in short is to preserve the landform. So before we dive into the preserve aspect, I just wanted to go through a couple of key terms and kind of grab these from some other sources. So it's not just me putting up definitions up there. So coastal resilience, so simply put, it's the ability to recover quickly following storms, the ability of a community to bounce back after hazardous events rather than simply reacting to the impacts. Barrier beach, we say that a lot, but what is a barrier beach? So it's a narrow, low-lying strip of beach and dune, roughly parallel to the coast, separated from the mainland by something like a bay or salt marsh. They provide tremendous resources to their communities. Tonight, obviously, we'll be focusing more so on things like storm and flood protection for the mainland, but a lot of recreational and commercial interests as well. And then nature-based solutions. This term gets thrown around a lot too, so I wanted to make sure to define it early on. Those are actions to address challenges through the protection, sustainable management, restoration of ecosystems, benefiting both biodiversity and human well-being. So for example, restoring coastal dunes through nourishment and plantings would be providing, habitat for wildlife, recreational access, and still allows the barrier beach to function naturally. So moving, changing, buffering storm impacts. As a barrier beach, Duxbury Beach plays an important role in protecting and increasing the resilience of what's behind it. So the bays and the coastal communities, of Duxbury, Kingston, and parts of Plymouth, as well as parts of Marshfield. However, Duxbury Beach is very vulnerable. It's pretty easy to see in this photo just how narrow that barrier beach is. It takes the brunt of wind and wave energy during storms, particularly nor'easters, based on its direction. So we're making sure that we allocate resources to preserving the barrier. And that's a really important part of what we do each year. DBR has a long and successful history of maintaining and restoring the barrier beach by using those aforementioned nature-based solutions. So probably a lot of these are pretty obvious, but I think it's a helpful reminder to think about, why we're doing all of this. We talk a lot about protection for the mainland, but preserving the landform does so much more than that. So I wanted to run through that quickly. It is, the keystone of our entire mission, right? Without the beach, there wouldn't be a space to enjoy or habitat for wildlife to use. So the enjoy part of our mission, obviously protecting the landform protects the bay and those recreational and commercial interests. It preserves access to the OSV beach and the back road and all those pullouts and other spaces beyond the parking lots or the northerly end. It preserves beach in general for folks. Maybe I turned it off myself. See how that goes. So obviously, there needs to be space, right, for what we're saying vehicles to park on, for folks to set up and everything. And then protection of infrastructure for recreation, like parking lots, Blakeman's Restaurant, etc. We're protecting habitats for hundreds of species, including rare and protected wildlife. And then that preserve aspect of our mission, which again is the focus for tonight, having that barrier beach intact and protected, protects overland access to hundreds of homes and other sites. It protects the bays and the salt marshes behind it, which are also play a really important role, right, in mitigating storm impacts to the mainland. And the barrier beach, with all of that, reduces risk to hundreds of homes, businesses, and public infrastructure. This is just a quick map to kind of highlight some of those areas that are protected and benefit from the storm protection by Duxbury Beach. So these preservation efforts are not new for Duxbury Beach Reservation. Probably for folks who have lived in town or in the area for years have seen a lot of this work. So some of the earliest work came in the 1930s after a 3-day nor'easter hit the beach and damaged part of the Powder Point Bridge. Some of that bridge material was then used to construct a fence on the beach to act as a sand catcher. I think that's a pretty cool tie between the beach and the bridge, and a fun way to really kick off some of the coastal resilience work. In the 1960s, there became more awareness about the detrimental impacts of unrestricted driving and other recreation on the beach and dunes. So throughout the 60s and 70s, a number of new methods were put in place, including attaching sand fencing to the Coast Guard poles running along the beach, placing Christmas trees to trap sand, and planting beach grass and woody shrubs. Some of these methods have continued and developed and improved over time, like sand fencing and plantings, while others have been deemed less useful or detrimental, like the use of Christmas trees to build the dunes. So the blizzard of 1978, which probably some of you were here for, put a lot of that work to the test. And fortunately, it showed that there had been success. They noted that in areas where snow fence and beach grass had been, the damage was less. And again, DBR rebuilt the dunes and the road, installed sand fence, planted beach grass to stabilize the dune. But recognizing the need for more extensive resilience work, Duxbury Beach constructed the first sacrificial. Wait, I didn't touch it that time. Following the. Sorry.
Talk loud.
So, you're weird about having something in my hand, that's what used to it, something goes down. So in recent years, the reservation has continued to test new methods of reservation using, sometimes multiple rows of sand fence, different patterns of grass planting and woody shrubs, and clumps or rows or things like that. Installing cobble berms, which folks will talk about in more detail later on, to prevent the back road eroding on the bayside. So more recently, DBR has tried to take advantage of a lot of state funding, especially the coastal zone management, coastal resiliency grants, as well as privately raised donations, and worked with expert consultants like folks from Woods Home Group, to collect data and perform analyses to better guide restoration efforts. So while we've continued to repair following storms, DBR also made the decision to start putting resources towards more proactive projects to strengthen the barrier beach following, in particular, the loss of funding from FEMA in 2005, 2006. Date. So today, DBR is tackling more large-scale proactive restoration work with an eye towards kind of our biggest challenges, our weakest points, constantly looking at, new technology and research to try to improve and protect the beach while retaining, its natural beauty and character, and the access that everyone enjoys. So some of the challenges that Duxbury Beach is facing today, and these are, what a lot of coastal communities and even non-coastal communities for some of these are facing. There's obviously the threat of kind of human-caused climate change. We're facing increased frequency and intensity of storms. So our designs and construction have to take the likelihood of, larger storms and that higher frequency into account, as well as kind of how we spend resources. We're also seeing, less frequent but higher intensity rainfall. So stormwater is having more of an impact from rainfall running over the beach. That was a project that we took on last year, was kind of addressing some of that. Sea level rise, of course, threatens access along the road. It obviously can threaten the salt marsh as well, helping, sorry, and can increase the erosion on the bayside and ocean side. So while the movement of sediment along the shoreline is natural and expected, it is being exacerbated by these other factors. And Duxbury Beach does not have, the same natural supply of sediment that it had a long time ago. There is armoring. So when I say armoring, that's things like seawalls, jetties, revetments that are either inhibiting or slowing the movement of sediments that would otherwise move along the shore and replenish some of what is lost on Duxbury Beach. So that's why a lot of the nourishment work that we have to do is so important. And then, of course, as a lot of folks see, we face increased competition for other sources of sediment to nourish the beach and dunes with more storms or just from commercial interest. At this point, Massachusetts doesn't allow offshore sand mining due to various environmental concerns, so that does limit DBR's ability and access to sediment sources. So it's something that we have to take into account and be really strategic about where we're putting, sediment, and when, making sure that it's gonna have the best longevity and the best impact that we can. So hopefully I've provided some context on the need and the challenges that we face as part of our coastal resilience work. But I don't want to end this on a bleak note, because the good news is that both DBR and a lot of other organizations are doing a lot of work at Duxbury Beach and elsewhere to tackle some of these problems. So before we hear from some of our other speakers about that work, I want to quickly sum up where DBR stands today and how we're facing these challenges. So our plan for coastal resilience moving forward, this is a little bit oversimplified, but I'll try to get through it quickly. We are trying to take on both proactive and reactive, I'll call it for want of a better word. So emergency work following storms, as well as maintenance work of areas that have been restored. Historically, following large storms, Duxbury Beach Reservation has, mobilized construction crews and volunteers and headed to the beach, to these hard hit areas. And that is obviously still going to be a component of our work. It always will have to be. But we're trying to, approach get ahead of potentially to increase the resilience of the beach before those storms hit. In order to do that work, we effectively were constantly, kind of planning for the future. So that includes large scale comprehensive permitting. At this point, we hold, I don't know, close to 10 different permits for about 3.5 miles of projects on Oceanside, Bayside, and roadway. At the same time, continue to work to build our reserves to respond to storms. And the key to all this work is to work smarter. Even with our best preparation efforts, the reality of, back-to-back major storms is a threat. So in the meantime, we have to be smart about, how and where resources are spent. We aim to take advantage of local existing projects to store sediment, partner with local contractors, apply for grants for larger projects whenever we can, and focus on areas that can be best addressed by the immediate resources that we have access to. Because different parts of the beach look different, more cobble, less cobble, Bayside versus Oceanside. So we're trying to be responsive to the resources that become available and then put them in the places that are most vulnerable. So this all comes together in the implementation of, typically multiple projects per year that again can be thought of in kind of these 3 categories of proactive, targeting vulnerable locations. Now that we have the permits to do that, again, we can kind of take advantage of resources that come up to address some of the concerns caused by flooding, erosion, and sea level rise. Maintenance, once a project is completed, the work doesn't end there. We continue to monitor that work, see how it's performing, and then, do maintenance efforts as needed to keep those areas resilient. Because as we know, erosion is a natural process. It is going to continue. We don't expect to, put down sand or cobble and for it to naturally just stay there forever. We're expecting movement, and we're going to respond to that with maintenance efforts as we're able. And then, of course, emergency. So despite our best efforts to proactively restore important areas, storm impacts are always going to be part of, coastal life. That isn't going to go away, probably going to increase in the future. So DBR has planned for and invested millions of dollars to address damages caused by storms over its decades of stewardship. And the aim is to try to, make sure that we're in a place to continue that work. Real quick, I just wanted to highlight one thing out on Duxbury Beach, and we'll hopefully send this out or post this as well. so you don't need to take notes or anything. But if you're, interested in being part of some of these efforts in a really simple way, there's these 2 chronologue stations out at the beach that help kind of track changing conditions, and changing, for these different projects. And it's as simple as taking consistent photos at these 2 locations, one near the Powder Point Bridge and one at crossover 2, and submitting them. So again, this will be provided, but I just wanted to put it up there, in case folks were curious about small things they could do when they're out at the beach, to help contribute to the coastal resilience efforts.
Thank you, Brenda. I appreciate that. We're gonna do a switch off from one presenter to the other, so that kind of lays the groundwork on a little bit of the past, what the focus is, and now we're gonna get into a bit of specifics of 3 different types of projects and what they're gonna be, what they currently are doing, what we're planning. The first one is very exciting to me because it's all about the monitoring. So the most important part of our projects, I think, is the last step, and that's monitoring to determine if it worked, if it didn't work, what our learnings are. And that's why we do monitoring for a 3-year minimum after each project. The nicest ones are the photos. If you take a photo from the same place for 3 years, every quarter, they can look really cool. Other ones aren't as cool. Measuring the height of vegetation, how much grew in a square area, how many shoots. Let's get a little tedious, but there's tons of different monitoring, but we're monitoring usually on site where other folks are looking bigger into pictures. What are the predictions? What's happening out to, gosh forbid, the east, where all that water is. And I love to say, thanks to Duxbury Beach, we're only looking at instead of 19 miles to Provincetown or 236 to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. The town only has to worry about 2.5 miles, or maybe 0.3 miles when it comes to the bridge. So thank goodness we have that barrier there that stops us. So for someone who's looking out past the east, where we try not to dabble, we have Anthony Karinsich, sorry. I was looking at Woodsville. Anthony is a senior scientist at Woodsville Oceanographic Institution, who studies the physical processes driving coastal water movement. Understanding these processes can provide valuable information about the coastal impacts of weather events and dispersion of nutrients and pollutants. He's primarily focused on the coastal waters of New England and had built a network of coastal observation stations from Rhode Island up to Maine. One of his recent installations is here on Duxbury Beach Reservation as part of a project to collect high-resolution data of the waters off the South Shore. This station provides information on offshore currents, waves, and winds that will be shared with local towns and stakeholders. And I know he's excited to be partnering with us to collect this valuable data because we are data junkies. He might not know that, but he does now. So without any further delay, Anthony, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I think you gave my whole talk. I can just stop here. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm excited to talk to you about a smaller project that I'm working on that I'm excited about because it's a step in a new direction towards shrinking what we do at the larger or global scale in the ocean down to something that ties into what the next speakers are going to do. So providing better data offshore. I've taken to call it environmental intelligence. The more intelligence you have of what's happening in the ocean space, if you're living on the coast, the better off you can make decisions, whether that's sand or street flooding and things like that. All those things are related. So the project, I'm from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. I'm going to come back to this picture in a minute, which is our equipment at Duxbury. Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution is also a private nonprofit. Our goal is to explore and understand the ocean and then communicate those results to the general public. And so I am a coastal oceanographer. I study winds, waves, and tides in oceans that are closer to the coast. And so I do a lot of work in the New England states because it's an ocean of convenience for us to collect as a natural laboratory. So Woods Hole Oceanographic, I gotta make sure I don't say Woods Hole because these guys are from Woods Hole as well, and you don't want to get confused. The Oceanographic has about 1,300 employees. There's about 150 scientists that come up with new ideas and new instruments and talk to engineers about how they want to measure their parameter off in the middle of the ocean. If it's in the middle of the ocean or the bottom of the ocean or the surface far over the horizon, we kind of dream of big and try to go out and collect that data. So what I'm going to be talking to you about is a smaller scale project, which is kind of thinking about the topic that we're all here for, is that coastal resiliency and trying to collect all the information you might want to have to make good decisions, whether they are over the long term or over the very short term. And what is what's the role of us as a scientific community or the engineering community in providing better data for those decisions to be made. So that's my goal. So ocean observations, I'm an observationalist, and the goal is to, a lot of them need to be retooled to solve coastal problems. The systems that Chris mentioned that I run from Rhode Island up into Maine are scale. I'll show you some pictures of them. They're hard to install far over the horizon. As a result, they don't give you that small scale information that you would need to understand, how this headland of this beach is reacting differently than the one down the beach or up the beach from it. And that's our goal today. So here's a picture of Egypt Beach when we were kind of scoping out where to put these instruments, but our goal is to preview a new way to measure things at higher resolution, and I'm looking offshore of the beach to look at ocean currents, spatial information about waves that will drive a lot of the sediment transport that I think you talk a lot about here, and then also nearshore winds, which is actually an interesting topic, and all three are related. One of the tools I use to do my observations, again, this is exchange across the continental shelf, is it's a radio wave oceanography. This is a field that's been around for a number of decades, but basically we have a radio, like a ham radio or it's basically a ham radio band. It's an antenna that you put on the beach and it sends out a signal, and that signal, the wave of that signal bounces off the waves on the ocean surface and comes back to you. I'll show that again in the next plot, but we can make these maps of all the arrows on that page are surface currents observed in real time over the horizon from systems that are sitting on land. So it's the red dots on the top of the page that are where the observing systems are, and they're looking out over the horizon, collecting data on the ocean surface and realizing this image of a really highly structured ocean flow, right? This is a snapshot of ocean circulation south of Martha's Vineyard in Nantucket. The color that you see in the background is the temperature of the sea surface. And so there's a 10-degree change in the sea surface temperature across the water south of Nantucket, and that drives a significant current from that. And so these are the types of measurements that we're trying to shrink down to smaller scale, closer to the coast, to provide that information to coastal managers. The radio systems that we use, again, we're sending out a radio wave. It interacts with ocean waves on the surface and bounces back to us. And we receive that and we look at the data and the Doppler shift of the data and all kinds of parameters about the signal to give information on the winds, waves, and currents. And the measurement is precisely measuring a wave on the ocean surface, and from that wave or the properties of that wave, you can say what's going on with the other waves, what the currents underneath the wave are doing, and what the winds above that wave are doing. Okay. So this is a system that's been around for a while, or the technology. There's an installed base of these radio wave systems up and down the coast of the east coast of the US and the west coast of the US. The pictures are a little washed out, but you can see on California covered by that blue area where we have this kind of low frequency or long range systems that are measuring out to 150 miles offshore. From again, land-based antennas. I'll show some pictures of those antennas in a minute. We have a lot of systems that are in the Mid-Atlantic Bight or the Gulf of Maine that are looking over the horizon at a little bit higher scale. All this data goes into a national network that is run by NOAA right now. And all the data gets available to the Coast Guard. So if the Coast Guard has a search and rescue operation, they can dial up these surface current maps and say, okay, I know the person went in the water at this time, or the current's doing. Let me use this data to triangulate where we think that person went. For kind of search and rescue operations, NOAA has an Office of Spill Response that they use the data for, and a lot of ocean models or numerical models of the ocean and even the atmosphere will use that data to help keep them honest. So it's an observational tool to do that. The benefits of them is they have wide coverage, high data return. They're cheap compared to satellites, and they have low power. So we use a little bit of power, and the signal goes a long way. A lot of the systems that are installed now are a little bit bigger than what would go at Duxbury Beach and up the coast of the South Shore. And that's one of the main problems kind of driving a smaller scale implementation is just the size of the instrument. You know, it's hard to put things on the beach. You know, you don't want to, it's a natural environment. We don't want to do anything to destroy that natural heritage we have there either. And so we tend to go to places that we can, like the picture on the right is from the Nantucket wastewater treatment plant. That is a place where they will allow us to come in and you know, put these antennas up, the larger scale antennas, but they end up being a little bit too big to do at the resolution that you need to have the high resolution observations offshore of the surf zone. And so what we've tried to do with this project which is funded by donors to the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, is shrink the equipment down, shrink the footprint of it, and build kind of a mesh of these radio systems, much like your cell phone, the 5G antennas, which is pictured here on a utility pole, or if you're in a big building, all the wireless routers, they all talk together and they all are able to transmit your signal from your phone or your device to where it's going to go. And that's the goal here, is to build a mesh of these types of systems to really have smaller, flexible equipment, flexible processing for the software to give you those critically needed observations where folks need it and make the products. And so the project that I'm working on that we have equipment in Duxbury is to do some proof of concept of shrinking the equipment down, showing that the data is valuable and useful at the scales that we can measure it. And then, you know, working with you all to understand what are the products that will be most helpful and how can we give them to you in a way that is most helpful, right? I can drown you in data and probably most of you won't like that. And so we want to give the right data at the right time to the right people. Okay, so again, the goal here is to increase coastal resiliency by getting more environmental intelligence offshore. And so I'm not really focused on the beach, I'm focused on the area offshore. The parameters that I'm really focused on are, you can see it from this box on the South Shore. There's this wavy green line along the coast. That's where we're going to try to measure waves using the systems, kind of imagining a line along the coast like that. There's that box where we can measure wind using all the data together. And then the bigger system is measuring surface currents. And I'm not going to go into detail of how you derive all the currents from the measurements of that and radio wave bouncing off the ocean waves. But the goal here was to put some of these instruments along the coast from Duxbury up to Scituate, have them work together, communicate with each other and us, so that we could build maps of winds and waves and currents along the coast. So you can measure waves or winds potentially, and with a wave buoy that you put on the door. The cost of these instruments is about the same as the cost of a wave buoy. And you know, you might put I have 4 instruments out there, and you might put 4 wave buoys out there for a year, and then have to bring them back because they got destroyed by a wave, or the biofouling on the mooring, you know, took them, need to be replaced. We have 4 of those systems, and we get this whole mesh of data, and not just 4 data points. That's the point. We are just in the process. We've set up all the equipment. We're collecting data right now. I don't have data to show you because it's just coming in right now, but I want to show you where they are and some of the innovations we have. So if you saw that picture of the Nantucket, we had a big giant shed sitting in the middle of the leaching ponds that they use to put the treated wastewater back into the ground. We have a lot of equipment installed, a lot of cables. At Duxbury, we have that little gray shed that you probably driven by and didn't even see. And that's exactly the way I wanted to happen. You didn't see it. And then across the parking lot from it, this is on the south side of the restaurant, you have these little white poles that are in the dune. We just buried those by hand. We have cables going back to this little gray box where the instrument is. It's powered by the power system you guys have there in place, and it kind of blended in, took us half a day to install. We walked away, and it's been collecting data ever since. So a nice, easy system there. We've also installed at Situate. This is a town vacant lot that's a little bit north of the White House. Same system. There's a group, a cluster of antennas kind of out in this rocks. They have to be a little higher just so they're the seawall. And then we have the same kind of red or green, sorry, get my colors right, gray box sitting here where it's almost like a nature preserve sign that the equipment is just inside. And so it's kind of easy to install, easy to uninstall, and has a pretty low impact on the local environment there. Finally, the last one we just did about a month ago was at Rexon Beach. So again, here's that kind of gray box next to, they have a little shed there. And, you know, most folks would not even see that it's there. That's the point. Instead of these big installations of radio systems that are around the country for that NOAA data set, this is a much smaller, more nimble system that can all work together. Okay. This is a picture of some of the bigger style antennas. Those are actually at Fourth Cliff up in Orem, the recreation center that's run by Hanscom Air Force Base. We've had those there for a couple of years, which is why we're doing these other installations around it, because this is kind of an anchor point for us to make sure that the data we collect from the bigger systems is the same as the ones we collect from the smaller, and we can get this mesh of winds and waves and currents offshore of the surf zone to be able to understand what's coming onshore and causing the damage or getting you guys information you might need. And then I think the goal here is, you know, we've done a lot of equipment so far. Again, this project is kind of an internally funded effort at the Oceanographic. We're collecting data from a lot of these sites. We're in this ocean data space right now, and we're all processing it and looking at the observations that are coming in. And the blue part on the page here is the part that's kind of coming next. Like, what are the products that stakeholders are going to want to have and be able to digest most easily? How are we calibrating them to make sure that they're getting accurate data sets? And then what are some of the visualizations that can most help both share the detailed observations that we're making with, you know, first responders or coastal managers or town planners. And so throughout this process, we've done permitting for all of these installations at all the towns that we've been working on. A lot of these are, you know, have gone through the Conservation Commission and all the towns on town line. We worked for Marshfield and Situate as well, and had some really great conversations ahead of time about what is the data you want, we're going to collect, and how might we be able to use it. I'm really excited to continue that as we start, the data starts rolling in, and we're able to provide kind of mass back out to these local stakeholders to make sure that they're getting what they need. So here's kind of an example, just here at the end of kind of a streamline of currents from the summer. Again, this is just a snapshot from the bigger systems that we operate south of Martha's Vineyard in Kentucky, of the types of maps that we're hoping to get out of the system that we're going to have here. And I think that is all I have. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony. I didn't realize you had the data scraping system in Fourth Cliff.
Yeah.
But that's fabulous. It's great to collect data, but being able to compare it to something that you know is working is always gives that warm and fuzzy feeling. One piece that I think is so important to point out for us in Duxbury is that though we like to think that we are the best beach, we might not be the only beach. And that is really helpful when it comes to talking about regional work. Grants, what we're looking at really needs to be thought regionally. Duxbury Beach Reservation secured in writing from the town of Marshfield that they would support us, as well as the town of Kingston, for submitting for regional grants. Really, you need to think about, as Brenna had pointed out, where the sand comes from, why it doesn't come, where it does come from, and looping in with Anthony's information. What do we assume is going to be happening with that sediment if we know how it's moving around? The fact that Anthony doesn't know but has linked us up with the other towns. I mean, we can really start to paint a picture of what is happening regionally. You know, the time of my beach and your beach kind of thing, that's gone. We need to look regionally, and that's what grants are looking at regionally. How are you leveraging different beaches? Whenever we want to do a grant, I always call Plymouth and say, hey, can I have a letter of support? You're gonna get sand in about 20 years, so send me the letter kind of thing, and they seem always happy to do that. So this ties in perfectly with getting that regional data. So we can show that we have a really clear picture, not only what happens at Duxbury Beach, but what happens before, and then where it goes afterwards. So thank you very much. Next, we have Brittany Hofnagel from Woods Hole Group. And Brittany is going to be presenting on coastal research and outreach study case about cobble berms. What are they and how do they work? Brittany is a climate resiliency specialist. She even has the name and the title, so she's living on us. With the Woods Hole Group, and helps communities assess climate change risks, connect vulnerabilities, assessments, and develop strategic plans and strategies for building resilience. So she is all about everything that we're talking about. And she has a passion for education and outreach, and I can tell you that some people have passions, some people have talents, and she has both. She can make complex things sound very very understandable, and then turn around and have conversations with their colleagues, and I'm just like, yeah, what she said. So without further ado, this is Brittany. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Those really kind words. Good evening, everyone. So glad to be here and really happy to be in front of you to talk about this work. Both Adam and I, you'll hear him speak after me, are from Woods Hole Group. We're a consulting firm that specializes in the coastal zones, anything where the land meets water. That's really our specialty. We have coastal engineers on staff, coastal planners, coastal geologists, and we all, take the information and the science that we get from institutions like WUI, and we apply it to problems that municipalities and communities are facing. So it's great to share our work with you. So I'm going to bring it down to the outreach and education part of coastal resiliency. How do we communicate with communities, municipal practitioner, environmental organizations, and help educate on how solutions and adaptation strategies operate. So we're going to focus a little bit on nature-based approaches and cobble berms. So throughout my talk, you should have a general understanding of nature-based approaches. We'll talk about cobble berms, and then we'll wrap up with a case study of Duxbury Beach. And throughout my presentation, you should see this overall theme of outreach and education and how we try to educate, again, those municipal staff members, environmental professionals, and other environmental organizations. So just to reiterate what others have said today is, what is coastal resiliency? So it's really that ability for our coast to adapt to changing climates, or conditions. This could mean coastal erosion due to the impacts of coastal storms, decrease in species diversity with changes in ocean water chemistry. It could be flooded roads from king high tide events. In the past, historically, hardened structures were used to support the built environments like Boston or other waterfront communities to kind of combat some of these issues. Those structures tend to be reflective of the wave energy. They're fixed in nature and can exacerbate erosion. So as recently in the last couple of years, the new focus has been on more green solutions or nature-based approaches to better respond to environmental problems along the coast. Nature-based approaches in general can help dissipate wave energy, are more mobile in nature, and represent more natural systems. So you may be familiar with all the work that's going on at Duxbury Beach Reservation. Is that a common nature-based approach is beach nourishment and dune enhancement. So extending that beach seaward and enhancing the dune to help buffer from the impacts of sea level rise and coastal storm surge. And this approach is more suitable for places with existing sandy beaches and used in places that experience erosion and have a sediment supply deficit. But other nature-based approaches that we don't often hear a ton about, for example, is the living seawall. So in a more built-up environment like Boston that has a lot of hardened infrastructure, we can explore the use of living seawalls that are appropriate for more urban environments and intended to increase biodiversity. And one that we'll focus on today is the cobble berms. So a more natural system working with nature and is appropriate for shoreline protection in areas experiencing coastal erosion. So a cobble berm, what are they? A cobble berm is a mound of cobble-sized sediment, typically 3 to 10 inches in size, constructed at a base of a coastal bank or dune intended to enhance the natural system to absorb wave energy and reduce erosion. These mimic the natural conditions at a beach and enhance the naturality of the beach. So again, using cobble berms in a place that already consists of cobble berms. And we really want to explore the use of cobble berms, following nature's lead. Cobble berms have been used in places other than Massachusetts, including, Oregon, Michigan, Indian Beach in Oregon, Maine, and Peru. And so the knowledge and the research base of cobble berms, Massachusetts, is limited. So we're looking to other places that have used them to see how they might be applicable in Massachusetts. How do they work? So like sandy beaches during storms or even seasonal changes, sand will be removed from the beach offshore or along the shore, whereas cobble berms are designed to move landward. So storms come through, they can help dissipate wave energy, but the gravel transport of cobbles are going to be more landward instead of offshore or along shore. And just to reiterate that cobble movement does not represent failure, it's just a natural adaptation for cobble berms. And also when you design a cobble berm, the size and the shape of the sediment is really important. So when you're designing a cobble berm, the coastal processes like the waves, tides, and currents, the size, the shape, slope, the elevations, amongst of other parameters are really important when designing a cobble berm. Remember, the purpose of cobble berms are to help dissipate wave action and are designed to move landward. So we really want that rounded cobble size so that they can move and not get stuck. If you have sediment that's more angular, you don't want it to become a fixed structure. You want to have those round cobble sizes so that it can be able to move landward like it's intended. However, when thinking about cobble berms, we acknowledge that there's knowledge gaps. So how do we understand that there's an urgent need for shore-based strategies. Nature-based approaches are flexible, adaptable, and provide many co-benefits, but they're not well studied in New England. Nature-based approaches are not as familiar as great infrastructure like seawalls and revetments, groins. This process requires new knowledge and skills to establish and maintain. So through this project that I'll start to talk about is how can we provide skills, knowledge, and resources to folks who need it. So those environmental practitioners, municipality staff that's looking to implement these cobble berms, and other environmental organizations. So this introduces the project. So I think Brenna mentioned it briefly, but with Duxbury Beach applied for a coastal resiliency grant for a 2-year project that would help develop an outreach and education program to teach practitioners about cobble berms. And so the working team started with Duxbury Beach Reservation and collaborated with the Massachusetts Coastal Zone Management, Woods Hole Group, us, and Stone Living Lab. There was 2 main goals of this project. It was a 2-year project. Goal 1 was to really emphasize the outreach and education. So the first year we developed a focus group. So learning from environmental practitioners, learning from municipality staff to really understand what resources they need, what information is helpful for them and, you know, what can they use or gather to successfully implement projects. We hosted a series of field trips and field courses, with some of those field trips and field courses happening at Duxbury Beach Reservation. We provided virtual information sessions to learn about permitting and design of cobble burns. And in the end, we created useful resources for environmental practitioners, municipal staff, and the public. So project number 2 was actually monitoring cobble burns. As I mentioned, you know, there's limited knowledge of cobble burns and how they perform. So we really wanted to develop this monitoring program to learn how they perform and how they might have had impacts on the local system. So the 4 main ways that we surveyed and monitored existing cobble burns are the geomorphic changes. So collecting land-based elevation surveys and drones to characterize the elevation of the project site or the formation of the existing berms. We understood the coastal processes and to evaluate the local conditions that could impact the cobble berms. We wanted to survey the biological impact, so understanding whether or not the placement of cobble berms or the construction or the existence of cobble berms can change by the diversity of species of animals that live in the nearby environment, or if the placement of cobbles would have an impact on the diversity of species, and also the salt marsh extent. So tracking changes in salt marsh can really also help evaluate whether the placement of cobble berms have an impact on adjacent or nearby salt marshes. So we conducted a variety of these surveys at multiple sites. We had 6 sites in this project, Coughlin Park and Bayside Expo, representing a more urban environment. Duxbury Beach, we had 2 sites, Powder Point Bridge, and down by the along the road near the Bayside Channel, and then the Trunk River and Stonewall Beach down the Cape and Islands. So I'm just going to walk through a few of these site locations and review the monitoring that occurred there. So Coughlin Park represents an urban park in Winthrop. It's a public park and other neighborhood amenities at risk of coastal erosion, right located along this western side of the peninsula here. It experienced the impacts of coastal storms and the impacts of wind-driven waves and tidal currents. And this was one of the sites that the field courses attended to learn, the focus groups would attend and learn about cobble burns. And you can, bottom left, you can see some photos of the impacts of the erosion and degradation of the habitat. So this is just a before, and this was the project that successfully received cobble to build a berm. And after, you can see that that cobble matches what was there before and mimics the existing conditions. And this is facing south, and this is after. This is the project site in Trunk River down in Falmouth. What's highlighted in yellow is the existing cobble burn, and it's fronting the Shining Sea bike path. The only sewer pipe infrastructure leading directly to Woods Hole is under this bike path. There's increased erosion risks from coastal storms and continued overwashing material over the bike path. So it's really invested from the town to protect this system. And then the last site is Duxbury. And so there's a site along the Powder Point Bridge and a site along the Bayside Channel. In these two. Hello. All right, well, I think I could pop on. these two sites are experiencing coastal erosion concerns. According to the study that happened in 2017, the Bayside Channel and Powder Point Bridge were identified as the top priorities for resiliency options. So erosion on the bridge from tidal currents and wind generated waves, and then erosion on the Bayside shoreline due to higher flow velocities in the Great Channel. In both of these sites, couple berms were recommended as an approach to enhance the resiliency of these two sites. And while Duxbury Beach Reservation is moving forward with these restoration projects, we, as part of this project, worked really closely with DBR staff to hold a field course. So practitioners, environmental organizations, municipal staff, and others came to the site to learn about the monitoring efforts, learn about the current erosion threats of the barrier beach and to these two sites before the projects were implemented. And so here's a before and after of the Bayside Channel and what it looks after. I think this is the original project, and then Adam will, I think, lightly touch on the project that's coming up. And then this is the picture of looking at the Powder Point Bridge. I would say that this is more representative of a mixed cobble and berm sediment. So it's partial sand, partial cobble, but again, it mimics the what's there in the existing conditions. Because right, as visible on the beach, there was both a mixture of sediment, or sand, and cobble. So again, highlighting the importance of the sediment source that you're using has to mimic what's there existing on site. So as I mentioned, we did create a variety of resources. One of them being a cobble berm story map. We have videos, which I think Brenna might send out in an email as like a cobble berm 101. There's fact sheets on the story map and more of these before and after photos. This is a QR code, but I think Brenna can likely share this QR code and the video in an email. But I just wanted this is just a unique project that was funded for 2 years, really intended to monitor existing and possible new construction of cobble berms, and really how to engage and educate municipal staff and environmental professionals on how to implement cobble berms. So with that, I think I will finish up.
Thank you, Brittany. We'll be talking about the Miracle Grow that you used in winter. I saw some before and after on that vegetation.
Right.
If anyone wants to have an in-depth conversation about how to find 4 to 6 inch rounded cobble, not angular, and how easy that is, how many quarries I've gone to, I'm like, yeah, it's a rock. We need it rounder. Mother Nature does it best. And then trying to supplement what she's done winds up being a search that I never thought in the past I would ever do. Adam. So Adam is probably responsible for a good chunk of the plans, the design, or the oversight of the projects that we've done for the last 3 years. So basically, when my board says, why are we spending so much money, it's Adam's fault. He doesn't touch anything without 2 commas, right? Now, we've been doing a lot of our nourishment projects, and Adam has been the principal architect on the site, saying, yeah, a little bit here, a little bit less there. That's all he does is squints, right? A little bit more than that. But Adam, now I should get the script. Adam is a senior coastal scientist at Winslow Group, focused on design, permitting, and facilitating the implementation of the ecological restoration and coastal resiliency projects throughout New England. Find key non-specific, and I think that's pretty much where Brittany was talking about what might work for an urban, might be a little bit tweaked when it comes to Duxbury. Adam is experienced in management of larger scale ecological restoration projects and implementation of bioengineering, bank stabilization, native planting. He is the plant whisperer. And plant and dune enhancement projects to increase the resilience of coastal resource areas and adjacent structures. Just a little bit of personal about Adam. When we were losing sort of reputation and some, I'm like, Adam, go take a walk and tell us what happened. And he told some we didn't have to worry about, it wasn't a disease. And then the other side, he said it was browsed. Browse me. Oh, recipe. So his knowledge surpasses what he's speaking about today. And that's my cue to stop talking. Is there anyone?
We're digging for better.
All right.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, great relationship in 3 years. But we only added the second comment over the past year. Thank you very much for the intro. My name is Adam Finkel. I'm a coastal scientist with the Woods Hole Group. And I know that Brittany touched on Woods Hole Group's history a little bit. So we're not Woods Hole Group. We're not Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, but our founders about 35 years ago, a little over 35 years ago now, decided that they had marketable data products and were working on solutions that were marketable outside of the public sector, and founded Woods Hole Group from that academic space. And I think the thing that makes our company really unique is we still have that academic spirit in-house, that kind of real investigative desire for learning, and we take great ownership of the data that we collect, and we use that information to the recommendations that we think our clients. I'm so happy to be here on the panel with folks tonight. My background prior to joining Woods Hole Group was actually on the construction side of the projects that we now design and implement. And so earlier today, Bo from Duxbury Construction and myself were our eyeballs in a sand pit trying to determine our nourishment project. And so I have a great deal of respect for that tangible satisfaction of being able to implement a project over just a couple of weeks that might have taken several years to get to the point where it's shoveled in. And so some of that will come into play during the talk tonight. So I'm going to be highlighting some successes that Duxbury Beach Reservation has had over the past several years in implementing resilience projects. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the unique characteristics of this particular barrier beach system, some of the lessons that were learned from the 2024 project next to the Powder Point Bridge, and how we got into some recommendations for sand and cobble nourishment at Duxbury Beach Reservation. Maybe. Oh, there we go. Am I? Yep. Yeah, it's just.
There you go.
Oh, it's just, yeah, all right, so we'll give it the long pause there. So just highlighting, hello? Just highlighting some of Duxbury Beach Reservation's commitment to this challenge of resilience on a dynamic barrier beach system. There's been an ongoing investment on the part of the organization and on the state of Massachusetts part to maintain the integrity of that landform. And so the real work began prior to 2017, but it resulted in coastal processes and resilience study that identified a suite of projects that could be implemented to improve the long-term resilience of the landform. In 2019, we implemented the first larger scale beach and dune nourishment project at Duxbury Beach Reservation. This was the project that spanned from crossover 1 to crossover 2 south of the Powder Point Bridge. From 2020 through 2024, we were engaged in comprehensive permitting of the entire barrier beach system to allow Duxbury Beach Reservation to be proactive in their management and nimble in their approach, so that they could respond to impacts as they occur and take advantage of sources of funding and sediment sources to be able to proactively pursue projects along the barrier. And you'll notice that that 4-year time span is what it took to secure all the local, state, and federal permits required to be able to adaptively manage this site. In 2023, we worked closely with Duxbury Construction and Duxbury Beach Reservation to implement the Duxbury Beach Park Nourishment Project, Seaward of Lakelands. And in 2024, we worked together on the construction of the bridge crossover 1 nourishment project, and then the Powder Point Bridge mixed sand and cobble nourishment project. So a lot of work has gone into the barrier already, and I think it's just important to highlight that proactive approach that Duxbury Beach Reservation has taken to the management of the system. Like Brittany mentioned, and like Brenna mentioned earlier on tonight, very little of this work would be possible without the support of the Massachusetts Office of Coastal Zone Management and also donors of Duxbury Beach Reservation. I guess one point, I don't mean to talk your ear off, but all of the projects that are listed here were guided by a series of priorities that were outlined in that initial study. So we're not shooting from the hip with the recommendations that we're making. We're being very informed with those recommendations through that guiding document. So continuing on to talk a little bit about the dynamic coastal processes that occur both on the ocean side and the bay side of the barrier. So focusing first on the ocean side, this barrier beach system is unique in that there is a substantial amount of coastal armoring that exists just north of the site. So Brittany included a really great graphic of the cobble berm that showed that during the winter, you typically have a beach profile that lowers in elevation as the beach erodes and some of that sediment gets transported just offshore, forms big sandbars. You can see the breakers about a quarter mile off the beach as the storms come through. But then over the course of the winter, dunes and coastal banks, think Cape Cod National Seashore, erode, and that eroded material is what builds up your summer profile. So the erosion of those natural landforms helps to build up that profile, and some of the sand that eroded over the winter also shifts back on shore. What's unique about this barrier beach system is that it's particularly sediment starved. So the coastal armoring, the seawalls that are located north of this site, do a really great job of protecting anthropogenic infrastructure, houses, roads, businesses, etc. But they do a really great job of cutting off a natural source of sediment that would otherwise make its way onto the beach and help to build up that profile. And that's why in areas close to the seawall or even some areas along Duxbury Beach Reservation, there's not a ton of beach that's left at high tide. So that's one unique condition. Another unique condition is shown in the bottom right here, where we have a tidal channel that encroaches really closely on the backside of that barrier beach system. So if we weren't here and nature was just taking its course, that barrier system would continue to migrate landward into Duxbury Bay. In this case, as that barrier beach migrates landward, rather than that sand building up and establishing new dunes over the course of time, a lot of the material ends up right in that tidal channel where swift currents carry it away from the backside of the barrier. So again, a unique condition that occurs on the bay side. And so there is, if we want to maintain the resilience building nature of the barrier, there is a need for us to be making up for some of that sediment-starved condition that exists. And the reason that we're incentivized to do that is not just because we enjoy recreating on the beach and it's a great asset for everyone who's here, but that there are substantial assets owned by individuals that live in the four towns landward of the barrier as well. And Chris did a great job of highlighting that when she mentioned that the thatch of ocean waves is cut down by an order of magnitude because of the presence of that barrier. So the communities of Plymouth, Kingston, Duxbury, and Marshfield benefit tremendously from the presence of the barrier, which is evidenced through the investment that the state has made in its ongoing resilience. Improving the resilience of the barrier, like I mentioned, involves adding some nourishment to increase the sediment supply. The comprehensive permitting that I mentioned on the previous slide allows DBR to proactively nourish as funds and sources allow, and adaptively manage those impacts as they occur, the emergency cases that Brenna has referred to. This year's 2025 projects are strategically focused on improving the resilience of Gurnett Road, portions of the Powder Point Bridge, and some of the parking areas that are directly adjacent to the backside of the barrier that are at risk from ongoing erosion of the system. And these recommended improvements, both from 2024 and 25, were considered high priority actions in the guiding management plan. So what lessons have we learned from the spring 2024 mixed sand and cobble nourishment project? This was just one aspect of a larger regional approach. We worked together with DBR and Duxbury Construction to get the project implemented in March 2024. There was a focus here on improving resilience of the highly erosional areas right around the Powder Point Bridge abutments, around the guard shack and around the beach parking areas that are located directly adjacent to the bridge. And we found that over the course of the summer and now through a good portion of this winter's storm season, that action has minimized further impacts to the maximum extent that we feel is practicable for a project of that size and scale. This design was also unique. What you can't see in these photos is that it also addressed some of the stormwater impacts where stormwater was flowing across the parking lot and discharging on the backside of this dune and causing large runouts. And we were able to mitigate that through the implementation of a vegetated swale along Gurnett Road and this section of the barrier. This was, again, a high priority project that was outlined in that 2017 coastal processes and resilience study. So this year, with guidance from the monitoring that Brittany has done, with observations that we've made along the beach and that Duxbury Beach Reservation has made, we're looking to expand that sand and cobble nourishment and revisit a successful strategy following the implementation of the 2024 project. At right are 6 locations that were identified where the backside of the barrier is acutely eroding and starting to encroach on Gurnett Road. Location 1 is directly across from the caterer's lot near Blakeman's. Locations 2 and 3 are at the tail ends of the cobble berm project that was implemented next to the bridge last winter. Location 4 is just south of the bridge, an area I'm calling or referring to as the horseshoe. And then location 5 is the longer section of cobble that was implemented, I want to say back in 2020 or maybe 2021, that's now in need of re-nourishment because we know cobble berms are dynamic and shift and don't last forever. So by the numbers, we're looking at 6 total sites, up to 3,800 linear feet, and up to 2,500 or so cubic yards of sand and cobble. Just to put that volume in perspective, it's small in the grand scheme of things. Our contractors would be hauling in excess of 3,000 cubic yards a day if we're implementing a larger scale beach nourishment project. This is 2,500 or so cubic yards total spread across all 6 sets. So we're taking a lighter approach in this case. Adaptive management could be implemented based on need. And that it's necessary again to compensate for the sediment starved conditions resulting from both the coastal armoring to the north and then on the bayside, the encroaching bayside channel. And again, sediment may mobilize and we may need to adapt and re-nourish in the future. And that's kind of the reality of coastal management. So taking a closer look at the area directly adjacent to the bridge, the areas that are shaded and hatched with the lines are the extents of last year's nourishment project. And so we're looking to extend a similar design a bit further along the shore to add some additional resilience along this section. So all material would be placed above the high tide line. That keeps this project outside of Army Corps jurisdiction, which opens up a whole different can of regulatory worms and extends the timeline out significantly. Sandy beaches that are located seaward of the berms would largely be maintained. And in areas like the Powder Point Bridge, where you have sand immediately seaward of a proposed berm, we would likely have some sand in that mix so that when it erodes, the material from the berm matches the existing condition that's found directly adjacent. We'd be maintaining the primary access points over these berms. Many of the flood pathways that have been established during previous storm events, like those shown here, along Granite Road would be restored. Restoration and revegetation plantings would be installed on the landward edge of the berm, and vegetation would be maintained to the maximum extent practical. And again, just highlighting the partnerships that we have with local contractors. Duxbury Beach Reservation did a great job of preserving the existing dune vegetation on the landward edge of this berm so that we did not need to implement a restoration and revegetation plan along this section. So just in wrapping up, just some key takeaways and expected outcomes for this year. So one of the primary causes of coastal erosion, we've talked about this a couple of times now, is that deficit of sediment within the local littoral set. On the ocean side, largely attributed to the presence of extensive coastal armoring and a lack of available sediment that's mobilized within the system. And on the bay side, the encroaching bayside channel, which takes eroded sediment or migrating sediment and sweeps it out of the system very quickly. To offset the deficit, we have nourished and will continue to nourish with compatible sediment. And that's a logical means for improving the resilience along the shoreline. Again, if we were in an undeveloped location, it's likely that we would allow these coastal processes to occur unimpeded. We're not in that space, and so it becomes prudent to maintain that natural protection for the benefit of all the landward assets. In mentioning that, I think it's important to just establish that the nourishment isn't going to stop erosion, but it does strengthen and improve the resilience of the landform in the short to mid-term. And that damage to landward assets is reduced by adding that nourishment. And although it's eventually displaced along shore or the profile changes of that nourishment, it's not lost. It shifts onshore, offshore, forms offshore wave breaks, etc. And I think one thing that I'd like to close on as kind of a key takeaway is we've been at this work for coming up on 10 years. And so in talking with Chris and Brenna about what the next steps might be as we continue to tick boxes within that guidance document, it does seem like it would be beneficial to revisit some of the recommendations that were set in 2017 to identify some key projects for the next decade of resilience at Duxbury Beach Reservation, because now being able to leverage new data sets, being able to leverage the monitoring data, et cetera, we may want to tweak and adapt some of those recommendations to allow Duxbury Beach to remain nimble in their coastal management. So with that, I will wrap up.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you to all our presenters. We have a whole host of folks that are listening online, that are typing, that have been typing in questions. We have people that have emailed prior to this event that have had questions, but I'm gonna give priority to the folks that are here. Because you braved the cold weather. Welcome to the. So if you have any questions, I'll repeat just in case the folks online can't hear you. And happy to say that these folks are happy to answer any questions. Yes, sir.
No. Bayside channel that presents up their erosion trips. What, it's maybe a dumb question, but we ever thought of relocating it? Is that possible?
So the question is, the Bayside channel, have we thought of relocating it? Short answer is yes. But I think Adam, would you like to answer that?
Sure, I can touch on that briefly. Did you read the 2017 report? No, the reason I say that, and I'm not gonna be able to remember the number, but number 2 in the report, chapter 7, number 2 is consider relocating the Bayside channel. So although it was recognized in the report, that report was designed to think outside of the box without the ramifications or limitations of coastal regulations. And so we, at the same time, we called out that alternative. We also acknowledged the fact that the regulatory pathway to doing so may prohibit that action from ever being implemented. So we did come up with some recommendations and a different channel configuration. But all of that available benthic habitat in the bay is habitat for shellfish, for finfish, etc. And so the regulatory hurdles that you'd have to overcome to be able to relocate that channel would likely be both cost and so costly and so time intensive that at this point, it's not something that we're actively pursuing. Would you say that matches
Yes.
your thinking?
I'm thinking that it took us 4 years to get work done on a site that exists that's not in the water. For 3.58 miles. So that would be a huge hurdle, but it is out there as kind of a dream wish. Yes, and
Yeah, scale per minute. How, I mean, it's really, has it always been that close, or is it that the beach moving westward somewhere? You know, and if it is moving, is it going to sort of encroach upon the channel and some?
so the question, and forgive my paraphrasing here, is again about the channel. Has it always been that adjacent, that close? And if so, is there a concern that what's going to be happening in the future? Adam, do you want to take this one?
Sure. That's a tough question. So if we think about what's fixed out on the barrier, we could consider Gurnett Road as a relatively fixed roadway that's been in its current configuration for at least decades at this point. The location of the road has not changed as a fixed point, but we've lost a significant amount of material on the bay side of the roadway. And so when we look at the historic aerials, the channel always encroached on the backside of the barrier, but not to the degree that it has in the past, let's call it 5 to 10 years. So I think, again, if we were allowing coastal processes to occur unimpeded, it's likely that the barrier on a decade or century long scale would migrate into the channel. And maybe because of the proximity of the channel to the backside of the barrier, that may be a location that would potentially form a new. We're talking on a centuries or millennial scale. But to my knowledge, it's the channel itself that's encroaching on the barrier rather than the entire landform shifting into the back. At least in the near term.
to get an appreciation, you could go out and see where the channel markers are at low tide. They're on Duxbury Beach. I'm gonna just pull a question from one of the folks that's emailed us. We've got quite a few. When do you think the outer beach will be breached by a catastrophic storm?
Next week.
Do you want me to give my exact sense?
Yeah.
These are all the hard ones I have to say, so I did read them. So I think our bigger concern are these more frequent storms, but if you look at, the proposed, projections, there's a reason why the insurance companies are starting to cancel most of my Cape Cod neighbors. Well overdue. The last significant one that leveled the beach would be Hurricane Bob. So I think that we're more concerned right now, not with the catastrophic, but with this continuously unrelenting, as Brenna said, increase in duration and amount of rainfall that we're getting. Anyone else from here? Okay. Yes, sir.
If you think about the beach over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, do you feel like you're making progress with keeping the beach sound? Or are we losing ground? Not euphemistic, but are we losing the battle or are we winning? Have we turned the tide? And we're actually making progress that puts us in a much better condition than we were 10 years ago, or 20 years ago, or even 30 years ago. Going back to the 1990s, the no names.
So the question is, in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years, are we making progress at kind of maintaining, if you will, in some aspect, the footprints of the coastal landform? I just paraphrased quite a bit. Or are we, it's kind of an uphill battle?
I've got to imagine you have a couple of thoughts about that.
I would think that I wouldn't go back 10, 15, 20 years. I would look at it from a change of proactive versus reactive. So in the past, we were able to maintain after storms. So there were big storms, big wipeouts, but we didn't have the management in-house to proactively address those. And one of the perfect ways to look at the last 5 years is if you look to see the project that Adam was speaking about, that's from the bridge to crossover 1. That's what we just did last year. If you look at between crossover 1 and crossover 2, that was done in 2019. The nice thing is that when you drive in that first section, you can see the new vegetation, you can see the sand fencing, it's 4 feet tall. You pass crossover 1, you can't see any sand fencing. You can't see any of it because the sand has accumulated and the vegetation has grown up so much. So I think there's been a bit of a change of management because now we're able to proactively add and we're not looking at stopping, but doing these coastal resiliency processes. So I think the dunes are smaller. If I believe half the people that have told me they were big dunes, we used to party and, you know, these dunes, no one could see us, those days are past. But I think that we're doing a really good job of being proactive, specifically where we think we need it based on modeling projections. And that's the best we can do. We're never going to stop a big one, if you will. Like the no name storm was pretty dramatic. Nemo was dramatic, but hopefully we'll be able to be resilient and that we won't have to start from scratch by the way that we've built the dunes today.
Go ahead. I was gonna ask you a question.
Oh. I was just gonna add to that, because I think it's on our website, we can include in the link, but there's from that beach and bay resiliency report, an image that shows kind of the erosion rates along the shoreline over time. And it is eroding along most of its length, but you can see points where it looks like it's built up. And at least some of those, it kind of points out in the report, this was, you know, a dune building project kind of thing. So that might be a cool place to look and kind of see how the barrier has changed and what the positive impacts from restoration. At least at that point, where obviously we've done a lot more, as Chris said, proactive restoration since then.
And I was just gonna ask a question of Anthony, because we do a lot of planning and ideation exercises and workshops with the local towns when we talk about identifying and prioritizing resilience building projects, and it might not be something as nature-based as working on beach or dune restoration. It might be, we've got to relocate the fire department. We've got to get, the Sandwich Fire Department, which sits basically below the high tide line out on the Cape, or we might need to raise a certain section of roadway to make sure that a neighborhood is accessible during a king tide event or a higher high tide event. And so I'm just curious, as you guys are developing your data collection tools, what are some of the products that either the towns or select boards or private citizens might be asking you for during these early stages?
I think the short answer is that it's too early to get an exact products of these. The products that I'm used to as a scientist are not the ones that would help out the town potentially, that both the delivery of them and the data content are different than what town planner looking at, yearly or annual or decadal scale would need to have, or a first responder needing to know, is this the street I need to close, or do I need to fire truck? Right, those are different questions than I ask in my daily work. I think that the goal for on the equipment side and thinking of the environmental intelligence side is to get that baseline data. Hey, the waves are different and are coming in different along this 30-kilometer or 30 or 20-mile stretch of the ocean. Then that's going to help us think about, okay, well, the fire department's got to move this direction in the long term, or these are the places where things are going to flood first. If you put the winds, waves, and tides into that storm surge model condition, and you're forcing it with the data that's going into that kind of predicted forecast is better. And so I think the stakeholder interacting with towns is critical, because to see what are the short term or very finite questions that folks have, and then how can you engineer a system that will provide a base layer of data on which people can add value added products to get that particular product to the right person at the right time. It's a bit like the weather service provides the forecast that everyone uses to show on the news, but it's not the weather service showing it, it's a company that's sitting on top of it, so this product that understands where it's going to go. So that's my answer to that question. It's not really, but I'm going to answer another question too. The gentleman that was talking about, like, are you winning, right? And I think that my colleagues here have done a great job of talking about the different types of problem. And one of the ways that some of the scientific community thinks about it is that the ecosystem services, like, what are the goods and services that the ecosystem provides, and how do you quantify that? And so, you could say that, that you're spending a lot of time getting dump trucks with sand and cobble getting out there, but what are you gaining by doing that? What is the barrier, to what benefit that is it providing to the flooding of the towns on inshore, or rapid erosion of some of the properties that are much more unresilient if they were exposed to the brunt of those waves? And so what is the good and service that this unit is providing to you, and then are you willing to put in the maintenance to maintain them? Right? Just like you're going to maintain your dishwasher at home, make sure you can wash your dishes every day, or even maintain parts of your house, and do that so you can continue to benefit from the services. So I think in that mindset, you're winning on a daily basis, because the cost of doing something greater could.
Oh,
Another, yes.
I just had a question about the seawall that's being rebuilt for north of the beach in what your impact. And, for the one seawalls, we're building another one with that seawall's up and the front goes to the next shoreline. Does the recreation have a stance on that, or, you guys, what's your opinion about how that's going to affect you?
So the question is about the seawall, Duxbury, Marshfield seawall that's north of Duxbury Beach Reservation property. And our thoughts on maintaining that, building it, replacing it. It's really difficult to have that conversation, because there's homes there, there's people there, where we we're committed to not having hard structures, but we're also not protecting where somebody lives. So it does have impacts when it comes to reduction of sediment transport, because there's a lack of sediment being transported there, and hence the trucks. But looking at it, it really is an issue that the whole East Coast, and somebody asked some of these questions here, the whole East Coast is kind of grappling with. You know, do we raise the seawall? Do we raise the house? Do we ask people to move kind of thing? I don't think that there's an appetite for a retreat right now. It's such a difficult conversation. The feds were, I don't know if they're continue, but they had a fund that would help people if they wanted to raise their house. But it's really a site by site. We know that there's impacts to Duxbury Beach Reservation. So we need to come up with different ways to kind of supplement the natural movement that isn't occurring anymore. Does that answer your question? Yes.
Is there a 5-year plan for a maintenance budget? And what happens if there's a 1990, a no-name storm? What happens to the maintenance budget at that point? Do you have limited, it's nice to live in the world of unlimited reserves.
Do we live in that?
But presuming you don't live in it, what happens when you have a large event for your maintenance budget?
So the question is, if we have a large event, what happens, where's the funding? What happens, you know, you're working on a maintenance plan right now, or a proactive plan. What do you do when something big happens? What the funding is, basically? How are you gonna fund that? Basically your question. I don't want to be the moderator that answers the questions. Okay.
That
I-
one might be unique to
It
you. Well, yeah, maybe you need to.
I promise I'm going to answer any questions.
Sorry, because it would be different because of the nonprofit status versus Plymouth Long Beach. For instance. Maybe not.
So that, a couple different things. One of my biggest concerns as executive director of Duxbury Beach Reservation is that a lot of people in this room have seen really large storms come, and then they've seen FEMA come in and fix it. And that ended in 2006. Luckily, we haven't had a major storm. I know Nemo was in 2013, but up until then, 75% of all of our major disasters, if you will, they were fixed by FEMA. They pulled out of fixing our beach that we maintained, and the town and the reservation were kind of left holding the bag, fixing the beach. The really short answer is we're working on proactive and maintenance. The storm damage that would occur from a very large storm, we don't have the funds to cover. It just simply doesn't exist. When our former president, Maggie Carney, I was looking at her revenue over the years historically. I'm like, what happened in 2015? You got all this money, you're putting my little chart out of whack. She said, storm. Give me a storm and people will come. And hopefully we've done enough in building of the dune so it reacts better, but it would be fundraising. My biggest concern is that if we're in that boat, everybody else is in the boat as well. So everybody's gonna be looking for the sand, everybody's gonna be looking for the funding. That's why I think our regional approach is a better way to go than it's about our beach. It's, you know, I don't wanna say Duxbury Beach, but if we're looking as a South Shore, we have a better story to tell because we're all in it together. But that's really the short answer. You can't fund for those large storms. Dig deep is what my development person would now tell me to plug in. But I think it's important that everybody understands kind of what we're doing. So we're trying to minimize impacts for our normal now large quantity of rain, but big storms, it's gonna be scary. On that happy note, I'm just gonna read one from the, what about online? Would you mind reading one, Deirdre? Just tell me, I'll repeat it.
Can rounded cobble be sifted from the beach's sand itself?
So I'm wondering what that question is. So the question is, can rounded cobble be sifted from the sand itself? We're not able to take the sand because if it's natural, then we can't take it from one location, sift it and put it in another location, though I like the idea. Because then we wouldn't have to look for the perfect cobble because we know where it is. So that's where it comes to, we have to match. So when every time we want to add sand or add cobble, we have to take all these samples and then we have to put a whole group to carry them, because you never carry a 5 gallon bucket full of cobble. And then it actually has to go to a place to be analyzed, and that comes with content and size, and then you go kind of shopping for it. But the short answer is no, we can't sieve our own. But if there's a location like a quarry, we can ask them to sieve the product, and then we pay for the sieving and we pay for the result. And we can say, you know, we really like cobble above 4 inches. And then they can sieve to that level, which is a much higher cost, because it's done by weight, and then you're paying for a sieving machine. And I can ask you this question, so evil. Do you have another one?
Well, yes, it's related. Where does the sand and cobble come from and what is the environmental impact there?
So the question is, where does the sand and cobble come from? And what would be the impact from that location that it's harvested at? How do you mind?
So there are a couple of different sources that we are typically able to leverage, and this is true whether we're working in Duxbury or on a site out in Truro. We're going to be working out at Long Neck Beach to reestablish their access, or whether we're working at Nauset Beach in Orleans or any other location South Shore. Typically, you're limited to either a source of dredged material that would then be beneficially reused on the beach, or an upland source. And the dredge material has limitations because typically a dredge is able to pump that material about a mile on its own. If you want to pump it through a pipe for more than a mile, you got to bring in a booster pump, and it doubles your cost and about halves your production rate. So if we're going to leverage, this is a long answer. But if we're gonna leverage a dredged source of material, it can't be muck out of the inner harbor. It's gotta be nice, clean sand from the approach channel into the harbor. And typically those projects take a really long time to permit, and that timing has to line up perfectly for when a beach nourishment project is ready to be constructed. So there are a lot of limitations on being able to beneficially reuse that nice, clean sand from the approach channel to our harbors, though we sometimes are able to make it happen. The environmental impacts associated with leveraging that type of source are very well studied and very well understood because of the level of environmental impact assessment that's required to advance a dredge project through permit. If there's not a dredge project that's available or located in close proximity to a nourishment site, then you're bringing in material that's excavated and trucked in from the upland. That material tends to be a little bit coarser in nature. If you've seen recent beach nourishment projects, it often has a little bit of iron staining on it. It's not a bad thing, but it comes out of the ground after glacial time, having a bit of iron deposit and fine grained material on the sand. Impacts associated with excavating the material and trucking to the site. You've got a carbon cost associated with any tree removal that's involved in the clearing of the site. And so typically after a site is cleared or sand is removed from it, it's nice to see those sites revegetated, to see the stormwater managed, and to see the trees replanted. And then you also have a higher carbon cost associated with the diesel fuel that's required to excavate it out of the ground and truck it to the site. I live down on Cape Cod. We've also got a sole source aquifer, and we also have several different sand pits that are located on the Cape. I haven't seen, doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but I haven't seen any evidence that the aquifer has been affected on sites where sand has been removed. And I think, again, best practice would be to get those sites restored and revegetated as soon as possible after sand has been removed.
Thank you. Another one, Bruna. Congratulations. This question, how much erosion damage do overstand vehicles cause on the beach? Do OSV permit costs recoup the cost of maintaining?
I just wanted to add something really quick, which I think was already said to Adam's answer. One of the reasons that we wanted to do the comprehensive large scale permitting was so that we could take advantage of opportunities when there is, you know, a shorter travel distance, so reducing, you know, diesel sites that were already gonna be, you know, excavated for some reason and take, you know, advantage of that, rather than looking at new sources, or standing ready to accept other materials that kind of need somewhere to go, because as Adam said, you know, it has to all line up with the permitting of a source, whether it's dredge or upland, and the permitting of a nourishment project. So the advantage for Duxbury Beach is that we have the permits, so we can kind of take advantage of those and lessen hopefully our environmental impact or our footprint at those sites. And then go back to Chris's little present question there. So I think I mentioned in that timeline, you know, back in the 60s, folks started realizing that, yeah, unrestricted driving over the dunes and the beach was not a great idea, did have a very detrimental impact. It was destroying vegetation, which holds, you know, the dune together. Today, obviously, overstand driving on Duxbury Beach is limited to a certain area. It's below the dunes, below the toe of the dunes, and it's more, you know, regulated both by the state and managed by beach operations, by Duxbury Beach Reservation. So that's why things like those permanent symbolic posts that go out below the toe of the dune to designate the OSV corridor are so important. And for folks that follow, you know, beach operations on social media or the emails, will periodically see reminders of like, hey, don't go west of those. Because that does mean that you're, you know, up onto the slope of the dune or encroaching on vegetation, and could be having a detrimental impact on the dune and causing erosion. The second part of the question was about costs. So
Do the fees make up for any impacts associated with it?
So Duxbury Beach Reservation does not sell the stickers for the overstands. I'm not sure if that was kind of what the question was implying. We lease the beach, including the OSV, to the town, which in turn sells those stickers and collects the revenue from that. So our kind of costs for maintenance and proactive work and the various infrastructure, the road, the crossovers, the parking lots and all of that stays as is or is increased obviously by storms or other damages, but is not made up for by sticker sales.
Deirdre, do you have any other questions before I? Okay. Any questions from the audience? I have a countdown to lift off, or I get a hook and it says 150. I think there was one question online asking about the protection of Marshfield. Adam, you had mentioned that Marshfield had been protected by Duxbury Beach. I'm assuming you're talking about north of the town line, that's behind Duxbury Beach, but the question was how is Marshfield protected?
Yep. So in addition to direct wave impacts, if the barrier wasn't present, there would be a direct flood pathway behind the barrier and up through the marshes and into marsh fields. So areas that are currently behind the seawall would be more flood exposed if the barrier didn't attenuate some of that wave energy and provide that level of flood damage protection.
Thank you. Well, leave on a happy note, one of the other questions, the first question that we got was, are we concerned about the freeze on federal grants? That was announced Monday. So it's always good to end with politics, right? This is a family dinner, so we won't go there. We have, recently, 2 years ago, received a federal grant. Right now, we are not working under a federal grant. However, the state, such as CZM Coastal Zone Management that we partner with, their funding is from the feds. So the money that they have for coastal resiliency projects that they've been very supportive of Duxbury Beach. We've received 7 in the last 6 years. That's kind of where our concern is at the moment, is that the federal funding not only is for federal grants, but it also federal funding goes to states and then they're able to distribute grants. So the more you file, hopefully the better we get. And we're looking to partner with the town on an upcoming educational grant that we might be able to put in. And that way we can educate the public on some of these topics. And one of my things is that we put a little placard on French memories and say 2018, Waterloo was here. Protect your croissants. I like their croissants. So on that note, the screen is gone. Because it reminds us. Thank you so much for coming. We're going to send a follow-up email with a couple of links on things that we've talked about, some of Brittany's videos, and fact sheets on Paul Burns. And always, if you have any questions, please reach out at info@duxburybeachreservation.org. Drive carefully. And thanks everybody online for